This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. A cattle market update with Tyler Cozzens, director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, starts today's show. He discusses the current market and also provides what the range and pasture conditions are and how they compare to previous years. Dorivar Ruiz Diaz, K-State soil fertility specialist, keeps the show rolling as he talks about considerations for anhydrous ammonia applications in the fall. Ending today's show is Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at K-State, with a Kansas profile on the founder and owner of Success Creative. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Tyler Cozzens. Tyler, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Tyler, starting off with our weekly cattle market update.
Sure, yeah. So kind of giving a recap of what we saw last week, specifically kind of looking at the Dodge City, Kansas feeder cattle price, looking at things for feeder steer prices at the various weight groups. Those 5 to 6 weights were actually up almost $8 from a week ago to $2.92. 6 to 7 weights were up over $1 from last week. That was up $2.61 to almost $2.62. 7 to 8 weights were actually down over $6 from a week ago to $2.49. 8 to 9 weights posted a almost $9.50 increase from the prior week to $2.57. Then the 900 to 1,000 pound feeder steers were actually down significantly, about $23 from the prior week to just about $2.25. On the feeder heifer side of things, the 5 to 6 weights were actually down almost $10 from last week to $2.50. 6 to 7 weights were down over $12 to $2.36. 7 to 8 weights posted a more than $9 decline to $2.33. 8 to 900 weights were $2.22. That's down about $5 from the prior week. Now, switching over and looking at the fed cattle side of things, looking at the 5-area average fed cattle price on a live basis, steers were actually $190 last week. That's actually up about just over $2 from the prior week. But compared to last year, that's actually up over $6. Heifers were $190 as well. Those were up almost $3 from last week, and that's up about $6 from the prior year. On a dress basis side of things, steers were $298, almost $299 from this last week. That's up over $2 from the last week, and compared to a year ago, that's up almost $9. Heifers were $298.50. That's actually up just over $2, about $2.50 from last week, and up over $8 from the prior year. Now, looking at kind of the wholesale side, the choice box beef prices for last week, cutout value was actually $321, about $321 last week. That's actually a decline of about $1 from last week. A couple of things to note on the primal values for the box beef side of things. The chuck and round, brisket and short plate actually posted declines of about 1 to 2% from the prior week. But also on the couple other things to note, the rib and the loin and flank also posted increases from the prior week of about 1 to 2%. So overall, some pretty modest changes there on the cutout value side of things for this last week.
As we are talking about the cattle market today, Tyler, also providing us with an update on regional prices for feeder steers weighing 700 to 800 pounds.
Sure, yeah, I think it's just an update on feeder steer price side of things is always kind of timely at this time of year as we kind of get into this fourth quarter here. And so kind of looking at a few specific regions here or markets. On South Dakota, one that I'll look at here. For South Dakota, prices actually peaked at $295 per hundredweight in mid-June and have been moving seasonally lower since that point. But since July, South Dakota's prices have been ranging from about $250 to $280 per hundredweight. Last year's prices moved lower during the fourth quarter as well. But if we look in Nebraska, those 7 to 8 weight feeder steer prices, they actually started the year just above $240 and moved steadily higher to a peak of about $295 in mid-July. But from August to last week, prices have been ranging from about $260 to $274 per hundredweight, which is tracking near levels seen at the same time last year. Now, one of the regions that LMIC tracks is what we call the Southern Plains, and that's actually just a simple average between Kansas and Oklahoma. And so in the Southern Plains region, prices actually started the year just below 230 and gradually climbed to a peak of 270 per hundredweight in July. But since that peak in July, prices have actually moved slightly lower to a range around 250 to 255 per hundredweight for several weeks now, which is similar to last year. Last year, prices in the Southern Plains actually moved about $10 to $20 per hundredweight lower during the fourth quarter. So we're kind of seeing a little bit of a seasonal decline here in kind of these Central Plains markets here that we typically will see at kind of this time of year as we get into the fourth quarter here.
Wanting to also talk about a report that comes out from the USDA NASS, range and pasture conditions.
Yeah, so one of the things we kind of look at here at LMIC is just range and pasture conditions. And as you noted, USDA NASS, National Agricultural Statistics Service, they report a weekly range of pasture conditions. And one of the things I want to note on that is these the ratings for these come out every week, but it's only from May through October. So last week, we actually had the last reported condition rating for this season. And so kind of some things to note on there. The condition ratings that they report are actually very poor, fair, good, and excellent conditions. So here at LMIC, we track these ratings, and specifically we look at poor and very poor condition ratings. And we do this by region. And what we're looking at here is kind of a gauge or an indication of feed availability for cow, calf, and backgrounding operations. So keep in mind that as I'm discussing these things, these ratings, a higher number for pasture and range conditions rated poor and very poor means that conditions are not good, and therefore feed availability is potentially lacking. But conversely, on the other hand, a low condition rating indicates that range and pasture conditions are good and feed availability is likely adequate. So with that kind of background information on that, let's discuss some of these ratings conditions that we saw this year. So nationally, looking at range of pasture conditions, the year actually started with condition ratings at 20 to 25% rated as poor and very poor, and then they moved seasonally higher. And as the season finished, 51% of range of pasture area was actually rated as poor and very poor, which is the highest for the year. And it was actually well above last year in the 5-year average, which are typically around 36%. So we saw a pretty good deterioration in just overall ratings as we finished the season there. Now, looking a little bit further into some of the various regions across the U.S. and those condition ratings, Western region of the U.S. started the season in May with about a 10 to 20% rating as poor and very poor, which was below last year in the 5-year average. But as the season progressed, ratings steadily moved higher, finishing the season with a rating of about 41%. This is in line with the 5-year average, but higher than the same period last year, which had a rating of about 37%. Now, the Great Plains region started the season off with a rating of about 10 to 15% rated as poor and very poor. This was actually much better than we saw from last year and the 5-year average, which were actually started the season around 30 to 40% rated as poor and very poor. But this year, as the season progressed, ratings deteriorated, and by the end of the season, the Great Plains region finished with a rating of about 46% rated as poor and very poor, which was above last year's rating of 19% and the 5-year average of 38%. So pretty quick deterioration in the Great Plains region to finish the season. Now, looking at the Southern Plains region, that region actually started the season around 25% rated as poor and very poor. This was actually better than what they started at last year, which was around 50%, but this year actually started about on par with where we've seen for historical averages with the 5-year average there. But by the end of the season, the Great Plains region actually finished with a rating of 57%. So pretty quickly decline in the ratings there as they finished the season. Now, the Corn Belt region started the season off with a rating of 5%, which was much better than last year in the 5-year average. But through the season, conditions tracked well below last year's historical levels until about August. And then starting in mid-August, range and pasture conditions started to deteriorate, and condition ratings of poor and very poor started to rise and finished the season at 43%, which was above last year's season-ending rating of 35% and the 5-year average of 23%. Now, lastly, kind of wrapping things up on that discussion, from the Southeast regions, started the season usually starts around 5 to 10% rated as poor and very poor. But this year, by by the time June came around, range of pasture conditions moved quickly higher. And by mid-July, range of pasture condition ratings of poor and very poor reached to about 30%. By September, we're 35% and ended up finishing the season just over 40%. Last year also saw ratings move quickly higher through the month of August to October, which differs from the 5-year average, where ratings usually move slightly higher through the season and finish with a rating around 20% versus 40% this year. Now, to kind of finish up some of the discussion, I teased out some of that information specifically for the state of Kansas to kind of give an indication of what's going on the state level there. So in Kansas, range and pasture conditions followed a similar pattern to what we saw for the 5-year average through the months of May to September, with ratings of about 10 to 30% rated as poor and very poor. In October, condition ratings moved quickly higher to 30% at the start of the month and ended of the season, or at the end of October, were actually 46% rated as poor and very poor. Now, comparing Kansas range of pasture condition ratings for 24 with those of what we saw in 2023, shows that condition ratings were much better in 24 than in 23. In 2023, range of pasture conditions for Kansas rated as poor and very poor range from about 30 to 60% compared to 2024's ratings of about 10 to 46%. So although condition ratings were worsened in recent weeks, 2024 actually posted a little bit better ratings this year than actually what we saw in the 2023 season.
Tyler, I appreciate you taking the time to join us and give us our cattle market update.
Thank you.
That was Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Tyler Cozzens. If you'd like to look into the Livestock Marketing Information Center, you can do so by going to LMIC.info. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Monday show talking about anhydrous ammonia with K-State Soil Fertility Specialist Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. Dorivar, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Dorivar, can you first explain to us how anhydrous ammonia works in the soil?
Yes, anhydrous ammonia, once it's injected in the soil, the initial process that happens is a reaction with water, essentially, for the conversion of that NH3 to NH4. So obviously, once that nitrogen is in the form of ammonium, NH4, it has a positive charge, and of course, soils have a negative charge. So that becomes stable there, and we don't have issues of losses, both by leaching or just the loss of gas, basically in the form of ammonia. So that's the initial reaction that happened there, and it's a key process that we need to keep in mind and think about what factors may be affecting losses as we are applying anhydrous in the fall.
Why might someone want to look into applying it this fall?
Yes, and that's a key question. And of course, there are many reasons why a producer may be thinking of fall application. One of the factors I often hear is workload. It's just a good time to do this, maybe a little bit slower time of the year. And so we can do this application. Obviously, there's other things like lower costs. Oftentimes, anhydrous may be a little cheaper in the fall compared to spring. And of course, that's a very, very good reason to do it. And even in some cases, there are situations where availability of anhydrous in the spring may be a little bit tight. And again, just give us a little bit more flexibility in the fall. So again, many reasons why we may want to do this. And of course, it's a good option and something to think about.
Is this something where every producer should just go put anhydrous ammonia on their field, or maybe should do some testing?
Yes, this is a good question. In what situations anhydrous ammonia may be a good practice in the fall? And typically in most of our soils, they're going to be medium or fine texture soils where potential for leaching and losses are not a concern. This is a good practice, in my opinion. Of course, we need to be thinking about some of the considerations in terms of temperature and and soil conditions. However, in general, it's going to be a good practice for us in Kansas in most of our soils. One exception will be in soils that are very sandy. They're going to be very prone to potential losses during the even fall or winter and spring. And so in that kind of situation, we want to avoid using anhydrous in the fall, and we just should be thinking about a spring application in that kind of situation.
For people who might be thinking about applying it, thinking about just the soil, you mentioned not wanting it to be sandy. What about the temperature?
Yes, and this is the key factor, and this is the main thing that we need to be talking about this fall for anhydrous ammonia is the soil temperature, and not really the air temperature, but the soil temperature. The guidelines that we typically use is that we want to do fall anhydrous application once the soil temperature at 4 inches goes below 50 degrees. And so the reason for this is because, again, we want to avoid losses. And remember, the main issue with nitrogen losses is really the nitrate, which is the process that will happen after microbial activity and conversion of that ammonium into the nitrate form. Now, the nitrate is the form that's going to be subject to leaching or denitrification. It's just a mobile form of nitrogen. The ammonium is not really an issue. And so what we want is to keep that nitrogen in the ammonium form as long as we can. And so, again, if we are watching that soil temperature, we are putting that anhydrous when temperature is 50 degrees or lower, then the microbial activity is going to slow down significantly, and of course going to get even less activity as we temperature approach freezing 32 and below. And so again, at that point, again, that nitrogen will be very stable and will stay there for the next spring where we're going to have that corn growing. And so that's the key factor. We need to we can get that information from, for example, the Mesonet across the state. We do have monitoring sites across the entire state to look at soil temperature. And we really need to be looking at the average of the last 7 days, because remember, temperature will be fluctuating, and we really want to look at that average to make sure that temperatures being that way for recent days and hopefully will stay that way moving forward.
Can the soil be too cold?
That's really not a concern. What we want is really to do that application when the temperature is low enough to minimize microbial activity. However, one concern here is the physical properties of the soil, and this is where the second factor that we need to keep in mind. Temperature is one of them, but then the second factor is the physical properties of the soil in terms of moisture. If we're talking about very dry soils, of course, that's going to be a challenge in terms of proper sealing of that injection point of anhydrous, and we may have some actual losses at the moment of application. If the ground is frozen, obviously that's going to affect as well the physical properties of that soil, so we're not able to do anhydrous application in that situation. And so one thing we need to be watching very closely at the moment of application is is the injection point sealing well, and are we having any potential losses at that time? That's something that we can really figure out pretty easily. You know, if we are putting anhydrous in the field, we can smell ammonia. Obviously, we have some losses happening, and so we either have to wait until the soil conditions are better, or we need to do something different in terms of application depth, perhaps, or settings in terms of the applicator to be able to seal that injection point much better. So we need to pay attention to that. Typically, even when soils are dry, we can do anhydrous application. Again, we typically have enough moisture there for that reaction to happen. But we may need to do a deeper application. At least 6 to 8 inches is typically where we start to reach some level of moisture, enough for that reaction to happen from conversion to ammonia to ammonium. And so those are some considerations. Soil temperature, again, we want to apply anhydrous when temperature is 50 degrees or below at the 4-inch depth. And we want to be applying when soil conditions are ideal, if possible. If not ideal, then we need to be making adjustments, maybe injecting that anhydrous a little bit deeper, and again, just make some adjustments as needed to be able to seal that injection point well. Otherwise, again, we can have significant losses at the time of application, and of course, that's a waste.
Are there any concerns if producers and growers are getting it put in their field and then there's a rain coming afterwards?
Those are typically not a big concern. Again, if we have rain coming after, it actually could be a positive thing. And we have some rain recently here and more rain coming hopefully in the next few days. And again, that additional moisture hopefully is going to help to seal that injection point. It's going to provide some moisture for that reaction to keep happening. Because again, the conversion of ammonia to ammonium is not going to happen instantly. It's going to take a few days. And again, availability of moisture is going to be a key factor for that reaction to happen. So again, if we are getting some rain after application, that will actually be a positive thing, contributing to that moisture needed for that conversion to happen.
How can producers see if this anhydrous ammonia application worked?
If the applicator is basically smell ammonia in the field, then we need to make some adjustments to the, again, application depth or ways to seal that better. Sometimes we just need to stop and wait for better conditions, and that's something to keep in mind as well.
Dorivar, how can people know if this is going to be there for next spring?
Conditions are ideal at the time of application. We are putting this nitrogen when temperature is low enough and sealing well. It is a good practice in Kansas. Typically, our potential for nitrogen losses in the fall and winter months are low because precipitation is very low in Kansas in the winter months. We are pretty dry for the most part, and so that's one advantage we have. Typically, we say that conversion of ammonium to nitrate takes close to about 3 months, depending on the condition. And again, if we are applying this anhydrous after temperature is low, then that conversion will take even longer. So that's guarantee us that the nitrogen will be there next spring for corn. Another practice that we may also consider is just adding a nitrification inhibitor. It is basically an added protection, especially if we are dealing with soils that may be a little bit sandier and or we are concerned about potential leaching or denitrification that we have in the past. Then adding a nitrification inhibitor also will add an additional protection and will extend basically the stability of that nitrogen in the spring months. And so, again, those are key things that we need to think about. And of course, again, if we follow these practices, it is a good practice for us. Fall application is a good practice for us in Kansas and can work very well. But again, we need to pay attention to some of these details.
Dorivar, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
That was K-State Soil Fertility Specialist Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. If you'd like to read more on this topic, you can check out 2 recent Agronomy Update articles titled Considerations for Fall Applications of Anhydrous Ammonia and Can Dry Soil Affect Anhydrous Ammonia Applications. I will link them in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or you can also find them by going to eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show with the Kansas Profile with K-State's Ron Wilson as he tells us about the founder and owner of 6S Creative.
This is Kansas Profile. I'm Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. Life moves at the speed of relationships, a speaker said recently. Human interactions and connections are so important to life and to business. Today we'll meet a Kansas ruralpreneur who has found relationships to be fundamental as his marketing business has grown. It's today's Kansas Profile. Tim Strathman is founder and owner of the marketing agency 6S Creative. Strathman grew up at Bern near his grandparents' farm. Strathman came from a truly rural school. I had 10 in my graduating class, Strathman said. In our small school, teachers had to cover a lot of different subjects, he said. Strathman took an intro to web design class and found that he really enjoyed the technology. Is there an advanced level to this? He asked at school. The teacher convinced the principal to have Strathman help teach the class the next year. By Strathman's senior year, he was building websites for local businesses. He studied software development at Manhattan Tech before marrying his wife and moving to Centralia. Strathman worked as a web developer for a local manufacturing company. One day the owner came in and said, "You know how to fly a drone, right?" Strathman said, "Yes. I need you to fly to Oklahoma and shoot aerial footage of our product in the field," the owner said. Strathman did so and found he really enjoyed it. By 2017, he was working for a Kansas City technology startup company, but didn't enjoy commuting to the city. He decided to approach the company about doing the marketing for them on his own. "I told my wife, I'll either not have a job or I'll have a client," Strathman said. In the end, he got a client. Company leaders agreed to have him do their marketing for them on his own. In 2022, he went full-time with his own marketing agency. Why name it 6S Creative? Our initial is S, and my wife and I have 4 kids, so there are 6 in our family, Strathman said. Besides, if you say 6S fast, it sounds like success, and that's what we want for our clients, he said. It took off faster than I ever would have thought, he said. Today, 6S Creative is a full-service marketing agency, offering branding, web design, content creation, digital strategy, video production, and more. The company also does photography and graphic design. It's been really exciting, Strathman said. I enjoy it more than anything else I've done. While 6S Creative works with all types of industries, the company's sweet spot appears to be small companies that work with agriculture, which Strathman loves. 95% of our work is in the ag industry, Strathman said. Companies will tell us, "We worked with an agency out of Chicago or Dallas," he said. They were great creative people, but they didn't know agriculture, the companies say. You people at 6S Creative understand agriculture and manufacturing, Strathman said. His work takes him across the nation. I've been in a different state every week since the 1st of April, Strathman said. Testimonials say things such as, "The team at 6S Creative is unmatched in their understanding of the ag industry, design skills, and genuine service," and "Tim and his team are absolutely fantastic." Strathman hopes to share more stories of agriculture. "I'd like to do podcasts and videos that share these fascinating stories and build connections with the public," he said. One of his videos featured a Kansas rancher with frozen mustache tending his cattle on a brutally cold winter day. The rancher said, "We work too hard for people to put ketchup on their steaks," Strathman said. That video has gotten 2 million views, he said. As 6S Creative has built relationships with clients, other companies have come to them. That's good to see in a rural community such as Centralia, population 485 people. Now that's rural. For more information, see www.6screative.com. That's www.6screative.com. Ag is a relationship business, Strathman said. We commend Tim Strathman and all those involved with 6S Creative for making a difference with their creativity and marketing while authentically connecting with clients. After all, life moves at the speed of relationships. For the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
If you would like to check out more Kansas profiles from K-State Research and Extension, you can do so by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net or by going to our website at ksre.ksu.edu. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.